Yesterday was Tu B'Shvat. So Tu B'Shvat, Tu means the letters Tet and Vav. Tet is 9 and Vav is 6. Together is 15. The 15th day of the month of Shvat. The Mishnah says, in the volume of the Mishnah dealing with Rosh Hashanah, that the 15th of Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year for the Ilanot, for the trees. What does that mean concretely? It means that fruits and vegetables that are grown in Israel are subject to different agricultural halachot. For example, in Israel, we have to commit to tithing the fruits before we can eat them. If you go to the market in Israel, they say these fruits and vegetables can be partaken of without fear that they weren't tithed properly, according to the way that fruits in Israel need to be tithed. So originally Tu B'Shvat was really agricultural day, but Tu B'Shvat is not a Torah holiday. It's not mentioned in the Torah, it's not mentioned in the Bible. It's actually not mentioned in the Talmud, I believe. But in the Shulchan Aruch, the halachic code from the 1500s, it says that we should not say tachanun, we should not do the supplication prayers on the 15th of Shvat, which means that it's a special day. And the Kabbalists of Tzfat in the 1500s devised the Tu B'Shvat Seder, where you eat certain dried fruits and fruits that Israel was blessed with, right? Like figs and grapes and olives and pomegranates. And there is a Kabbalistic theme that on Tu B'Shvat we strive to alleviate, to achieve a tikkun for the primordial sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Later on, Tu B'Shvat also became a popular holiday in modern day Israel. Today it's kind of like Jewish environmentalism. We take care of our planet, we take care of our resources. There's a beautiful midrash that says that God took Adam to a pleasure stroll in the Garden of Eden and told him, look at everything that I created. Everything that I created for your sake. In other words, for humanity's sake. Be mindful that you don't ruin it. For should you ruin it, there will be no one after you to fix it. And if you think about this midrash, thousands of years later, it's pretty outstanding, right? We have this global cosmic responsibility to take care of our environment. And in the absence of that, there will be very little left for our descendants, right? In a few decades or centuries' time. Also, the Hebrew word for nature, hateva, has the same numerical value in gematria as the word Elohim, Elokim. Elokim is the God of nature. And there have been many Hasidim who still go to the forests to try and connect to God's presence and God's energy by looking at the wonders of nature that God created and which God keeps on enlivening. So especially the idea of trees, we know that what enables a tree to exist is photosynthesis, right? It's not a tangible process that we can see. When the sun interacts with the oxygen and the leaves, and we can't see that process that enables a tree to really endure and exist. It's the same thing with people. If you think about the things that enable us to endure and exist beyond the biological, it's really friendship and loyalty and values and principles and our commitments to these things, dedication, devotion, these things are not tangible things. The things that enable a tree to exist and the things that enable humans to persist in life are not tangible things. And lastly, of course, the one thing that a tree lives or dies upon is their roots. The Tehillim starts, the book of Psalms, by saying that a person who is connected to Torah and to the community is like a tree that's planted next to a spring of water that managed to endure even great trials and tribulations. And a person who is not connected to Jewish life and to the community is like a thorn in the desert, that one wind can scatter it all around and it's left dry and desolate and helpless. So we have our roots in the tradition. The trees have their roots, without which they can't exist. Of course, the roots of the trees are concealed from the eye. We can't see them. Similarly, our roots are not physical. They are spiritual, they are cultural, they are familial, they are religious, right? They are emotional, they are historical, our personal histories, our family histories, our national histories. So these are some allegories and analogies that our sages draw between the vitality of a tree and the vitality of a human being, because the Torah actually says, in a somewhat different context, that a person, a human being, is likened to a tree. So that's a few words about Tu B'Shvat. And now let's finally do some parsha. So the name of our parasha is Yitro. Yitro, it's on page 344. But before we jump in, I'm going to say, who was Yitro? Yitro, in English Jethro, was Moses' father-in-law, a Midianite, a non-Jew. Remember when Moses escaped to the desert after he killed the Egyptian cop, and then he saw two Jews fighting, and he tried to separate and create peace between them, and one of those Jews told Moses, why are you interfering? Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian cop? And Moses understood the word is out that he killed the Egyptian cop, so he ran away to the desert. And then he saw shepherds harassing 4 sisters, 4 women, and these were Jethro's daughters. One of them he married, Tzipporah. But Jethro, Rashi tells us, was a high priest of idolatry. Jethro was a seeker. He experimented with all the different idolatrous doctrines of the time, searching for truth, and finally he found it in monotheism. Finally he found truth in monotheism. According to most rabbinic commentators, Jethro converted to Judaism, but according to a few, including the Sephardic Italian commentator Rabbi Sessler, Yitro didn't convert. He became a monotheist, but not specifically a Jew.
Was he pagan?
No, if you're a monotheist, then theoretically you could be an idolatrous monotheist, because the Egyptians at some point were monotheists. They worshipped the sun god. Right. So even though it's one god, they worshipped a physical substance, right? So that's not really spiritual monotheism. In any event, it's very instructive that our parasha, the parasha of the 10 Commandments, is named after a non-Jew, Jethro, Yitro, who experimented with all forms of idolatry before he became either a monotheist or a Jew, specifically. And it comes to teach us about the power to change, the power of tshuva, the power of achieving self-transformation, what people today call personal growth. One of our famous rabbis of antiquity, Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest rabbis of all time, didn't read or write Hebrew until he was 40. Reish Lakish, another great Talmudic rabbi, was not observant until a very late stage in life.
Still hope for me.
What?
There's still hope for me.
There's still hope for everyone. And Uri Zohar, by the way, who is a renowned rabbi in Israel today, used to be one of the stars of the secular bohemian scene in Israel. He was all about dating and drugs, and he became, today he made tshuva when he was around 40. So first of all, the Torah tells us that, like there's this song from the 90s. Mark, do you know who sings that song? I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you're like, as long as you love me. It's a British band. In other words, the Torah is telling us it doesn't matter who we are, what were our early circumstances in life, what's our ethnic or religious or socioeconomic background. We all have an ability, it's much harder for some, granted, to achieve self-transformation in life. So this is parashat Yitro.
Mark, does he look like a rocker?
I don't know. He looks like the music kind of guy.
Okay.
Anyway, maybe it's Tears for Fears. I don't remember the name of the band.
Kind of sort of tone on.
But notice that the parasha of the Ten Commandments is named after a non-Jew. Which other book of the Bible is named after a non-Jew?
Ruth?
Very good. When do we read Ruth?
Oh, God, it's...
Shavuot.
It's
On Shavuot. Ruth was also a convert. Now think about it. Yitro, the giving of the Ten Commandments, the culmination of the Torah. There has never been in religious history before or after a popular mass revelation. Later on, the Torah will say in Deuteronomy, Hanishma. Anybody ever heard of such a thing? That an entire people beheld God's presence? Every Joe Schmo got to see Hashem? If you look at Christianity or Islam, they privilege one person, one individual, one man who experienced revelation, and he gave the message to the people. Judaism, in a sense, we see the democratization of spirituality. The sages say that what a shifcha, what a maidservant, what a nanny saw upon the splitting of the sea, even the prophet Ezekiel, with all his great revelations in the book of Ezekiel that served as the foundations for the Kabbalah later on, did not experience. So, our sages chose to name this Torah portion after a non-Jew, Jethro, who spent much of his life experimenting with idolatry. And on Shavuot, the holiday in which we receive the Torah, right? That's Shavuot. We read the book of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite non-Jewish woman who chose to join our people, right? So it's something very instructive about the essence of Judaism. You know, Judaism doesn't proselytize. In Christianity and Islam, you have missionaries in Christianity. You know, they go and say our religion is the best. In the case of Catholicism, the Catholic traditional view is that unless you accept the Catholic way, then you're going to go to hell. Judaism, you know, shies away from those things. Judaism champions what a contemporary Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, calls the dignity of difference. You know, it's a divinely ordained that there should be diversity in the world. Ethnic diversity, cultural, linguistic, religious. Hashem loves diversity. That's why the Tower of Babel was destroyed, because they wanted to create one tower, one humanity, homogeneous, with one language and several words. But God prizes diversity. So diversity is a source for celebration, not for lamentation. And it's very instructive that our parasha is named after a non-Jew, right? And so is the book of Ruth. By the way, when we say in English that somebody is ruthless, we mean that this person doesn't have the charitable qualities of Ruth. That Ruth was compassionate and kind and loyal, right, and honest. So we say, oh, this is a ruthless person. It means that this person...
It really comes from
Yeah.
the word Ruth,
From
her name?
Yeah,
There's a movie came out a long time ago called Ruthless People.
yeah. It's good, right?
Is it also important about Jethro that maybe one of the reasons that he's named for a parashat is he gave Moses a way to a judiciary, a way to rule over, to adjudicate
Right.
cases.
So
the law, in a sense, how do you dispense this law?
sure, and Ruth was the great grandmother of King David, for sure. So let's look at this. Let's jump in. Page 344, verse 1. Vayishma Yitro, and Jethro heard. Who was Jethro? He was a Kohen in Midian. He was a high priest of idolatry. That was on his resume from his early years. Choten Moshe, Moses' brother-in-law, et kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe u'Yisrael amo. He heard that God took the Jewish people with Moses out of Egypt. He heard about the splitting of the sea, which we read about last Shabbat. And he wrote about the war with Amalek, the Amalekites. That the Amalekites are like the Nazis of antiquity. The Amalekites wanted to destroy the Jewish people, women, children, elderly, to annihilate the Jewish people without any reason. You know, later on the ancient Hebrews led military campaigns against the indigenous population of Canaan, of Israel, right? Like the Canaanites and the Philistines, but this was a rational war over territory. The Amalekites simply wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, like Haman, like the Nazis. Also, Kabbalah teaches that Amalek has the same numerology, the same gematria as the word Safek, which is Hebrew for doubt. So Amalek is self-doubt, self-deprecation. When we feel that we're just not good and nothing is going to change, we're going to be stuck in our current situation, a sense of helplessness and reactivity, that's an Amalek state of mind. Okay, and Rashi says that Jethro has many names in the Bible. He has the name Reuel, he has the name Jethro, Yeter, Chovev, Chever, Kini, Putiel. So, now he heard about the manna and other things. And second verse, so Moses' father-in-law Moses took Tzipporah, Moses' wife, after she was taken away. So according to Rashi, when all the action was taking place in Egypt and the 10 plagues and all that, Moses' wife Tzipporah was in Midian with their 2 sons. Who were their 2 sons? Verse 3. Moses and Tzipporah had two sons. One is Gershom. Why did Moses name his first son with Tzipporah Gershom? Because it's really 2 words in Hebrew. Ger is a stranger. Sham means there. I was a stranger there. Where was Moses a stranger? In Midian, when he ran for his life. I was a stranger in a foreign land. The same thing with Joseph. Joseph named his first son Menashe because Hashem has helped me forget my suffering in a foreign land. And the second son, Joseph, called Ephraim, that Hashem, which means Hashem made me prosper in a foreign land. And the same thing here. Eliezer is, so Gershom is the first son of Moses, the second one is Eliezer. What is Eliezer? Eli is my God, Ezer is helper, because my God is my helper, and he saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. And verse 5, and Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, came with Moses' sons and Moses' wife to Moses to the desert, where he was encamped, where they were parked. They had meters there for their cars, right?
Yeah.
That's why we knew exactly what cars they rode when they got out of Egypt, right? Nissan. That's why we celebrate Passover on Nissan. Where were the people of Israel parking? Hara Elohim, in the mountain of God. Which mountain is that? Mount Sinai. Very good. It's Sinai Temple right here in Beverly Glen in Wilshire. What did Jethro tell Moses, his son-in-law? Verse 6, and he told Moses, I am your father-in-law, Jethro. Here I am. I came to you with your wife and 2 kids. Rashi says he sent an emissary to let Moses know that he's coming in advance. It was either a FedEx or UPS emissary. Verse 7, and Moses came out towards his father-in-law. So we see that Moses has reverence, respect for his father-in-law, and he prostrated himself before him, kind of like the Japanese bow of respect of antiquity. He kissed him, because he learned to kiss men. Moses learned to kiss men at Sephardic temple, and they greeted one another, and they entered the tent. And he said, come in, step into my office. Verse 8, and Moses told his father-in-law everything that Hashem has done to Pharaoh in Egypt, and everything that Hashem has done for Israel along the road, the splitting of the sea, and the manna from heaven. And Jethro was happy to hear all that. And later on it says that they worshipped together and they had a hearty meal. That was really the first aliyah for Shabbat. In the second aliyah, we're jumping to verse 13.
What's up, 11?
Okay.
Now I know the Lord is greater than
Yeah, I have to skip, otherwise we won't get much. So verse 13 on page 347. And it came to pass the next day after Jethro came that Moses was Judge Judy. Moses was the judge of the entire people. There was nobody else. Vayamod ha'am al Moshe min haboker ad erev. Moses was a workaholic. He had to work the whole day. It's very dangerous, for leaders to take on too much. What we have in our parashat now is the birth of the business and organizational art of delegation. Okay? Look at verse 14. Vayar choten Moshe et kol asher u'selam. And Jethro saw all that Moses was working a 70-hour week. And he said, Ma hadavar hazeh asher ata u'selam. What are you doing to this people? Madua ata yoshev levadcha. Why are you judging alone? And the whole people are upon you from dawn till night. And Moses says, because they come to me, I got to do it. Who is going to do it if I'm not going to do it? What's Jethro's response? What's Jethro's response in verse 13? You're killing yourself. Listen to me, son. Navol tibol. You will wither away. What's the word in English when a flower is taken out of water and it withers? Is there another word for it when a flower kind of dies? Is there a word for it in English? That's the word navol in Hebrew. It withers, right? It withers away. So you're going to wither yourself away. You're going to run out of oxygen. You're killing yourself, right? Ki chaved mimcha hadavar. It's too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. So the art of delegation. Now listen to your father-in-law. Verse 19. Ata shema bekoli. I'll give you sound advice, and God will be with you. Verse 21. You will choose from all the people of Israel, Anshei Chayil, great people of stature, people of integrity, people of dignity, people of learning, Yirei Elokim, people who fear God, Anshei Emet, people of truth, Sonei Vetza, people who despise greed. V'samta aleim sarei alafim. And over them you will appoint thousands of leaders. Right? Leaders over thousands, leaders over hundreds, leaders over 50s, leaders over tens. Judicial hierarchies. Right? Okay? Verse 22. V'shaftu et ha'am b'chol et. And they will judge. Verse 23. And if you'll follow my advice here, v'yachol ta'amod, you'll be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You'll be able to live a long life. V'gam kol ha'am hazeh al mekomo yaveh b'shalom, and everything will work peacefully. So Jethro is our first business coach, right? And he's teaching us the art of delegation.
I'm a little confused though, Rabbi.
Sure, go ahead.
Moses went to whatever land that they...
Midian.
Midian, by himself.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's talking about administering and judging all the people.
The people of Israel
follow?
in the desert. Jethro came to meet Moses and the people of Israel in the Sinai. Okay? So this is about appointing judges
This is after
over the
we
Jewish
left,
people.
obviously,
Yeah.
Egypt.
Sure.
And we're in the Sinai.
Right.
And this is what this is referring to.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good? Yeah? Makes sense?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, great. And Moses did so, right? And later on it says in verse 25 that Moses chose those fine individuals and he appointed them as leaders and they judged everything. And Vayishlach Moshe et chotono ve'ilech lo el artzo. Verse 27, Moses sent his father-in-law back to his country, to Midian. Rashi says to convert the members of his family, because he wanted to convert the rest of his family. Jethro wanted to convert the remainder of his family to Judaism, and also proliferate, propagate, proclaim monotheism there as well. Now we're at the 4th Aliyah for Shabbat, and now we're getting to the revelation at Mount Sinai. Okay?
Okay, there was no verse 27.
I'm sorry?
There was no verse.
There was no
20.
verse 27. It ends at 25, and then it starts up again.
No, the last line is 27.
Let me see.
24.
20, I don't see it.
On page
25.
349,
yeah, yeah. Raquel is
the
correct.
first paragraph.
We do have a verse 27.
Yeah.
Now,
Her father-in-law depart.
Oh,
right.
that was- oh.
Now we're going to the 4th Torah portion, which is chapter 19, verse 1, page 349 in English. On the 3rd day, on the 3rd month, back then, the first month was Nisan, the month of Pesach of the Exodus. Then Sivan was the 2nd month. Sorry, Iyar was the 2nd month, and Sivan was the 3rd month. That's why Shavuot is in Sivan. Welcome. How are you doing? We have a book for you.
Thank you.
We're on page 349.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
That's the month of Gemini. And what's interesting that this is the month of Gemini, because I'm a Gemini, it's that the ruling planet they believed in astrology, but the ruling planet for Mercury is Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Mercury had the job of being the emissary between the people and God. He was the
Interesting.
one who made the trip up and down.
2 M's, Mercury and Moses.
And
Okay.
exactly, and it fits in perfectly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So 349 verse 1, on the 3rd day, on the 3rd month, which is Sivan, that the children of Israel departed from Egypt. At that day they reached the desert of Sinai. Rashi says it was the 1st of Sivan, the Rosh Chodesh. And they traveled in verse 2 from a place called Rephidim, and they arrived at the desert, the Sinai desert, and they parked in the desert. They encamped Vayichan Sham Israel, and Israel, meaning the people Israel, the nation, the people of Israel, encamped there, Neged Ahar, facing the mountain. So now we have a very famous Torah teaching from Rashi that we need to understand a little bit of the Hebrew here in order to appreciate it. So Hebrew is like French, that when you say it doesn't say, it kind of says like he parked there, meaning Israel parked there, not they parked there. Do you understand what I mean?
The group.
Right, but it says he parked there. Israel parked there.
Singular.
He, singular, rather than they parked there, plural. Why? Because Rashi says they were ke'ish echad belev echad. They were akin to being one person with one heart. They were utterly unified. They were so united that they were one cohesive unit. And that's what it takes for the Jewish people to receive the Torah. Right? It's like on the eve of the 6-day war, Jews all over the world were united. You know, Jews in America were giving away to Israel the money that they saved to put a down payment on a home to try and save Israel. It was one of those rare occurrences in Jewish history that everybody was on the same page, the same paragraph, and the same sentence, and the same word, and the same letter, and the same dot. Right? This unity from below facilitated unity from on high. Right? It's a Kabbalistic thing.
So and then he also says more, right? Rashi.
But yeah, he says, but the rest of the encampments in the Sinai, we're verse 2 on 349. The rest of the encampments in the desert and throughout most of our history, we were a very divided people, right? You know the story about a Jew who survives a plane crash and lands on a desert island, and they find him after a year, and then he comes back to do a documentary, and he said, this is where I slept, this is where I ate from the trees, that's the spring where I drank water. And they see these two structures, like they ask him, what's that? He says, these are the synagogues. He says, what do you mean the synagogues? It's just you. Why two? Why two synagogues? He said, well, of course, one to pray in, one to never set foot in. So,
in Morocco we said different.
Yeah.
I have two, so if I get mad at this one, I'll go to this one.
I have two what?
If I get mad at this one, I'll go to the other one.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like the two guys who came to the rabbi and they had a disputation, and the rabbi heard the first one first and told him, you're right. And then the second one said, hold on, listen to my perspective. And then the rabbi told the second guy, you're right. And then the rabbi's wife heard this and said, how can they both be right? And the rabbi said, you're also right. Anyway, so unity below enabled revelation. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe also said, we were facing the mountain, we're facing the Torah. So if we are united politically and spiritually, then we can go to unimaginable places. Good. And Moses ascended on to God, verse 3, and Hashem called him from the mountain, says, this you should tell the house of Jacob and the people of Israel. So this is a poetic rendition, right? The house of Jacob, the children of Israel. Rashi explains that the house of Jacob means the women, and the children of Israel means the men. And if you ever wondered why in the ultra-Orthodox world they have the girls' school system is called Beit Yaakov, or the Ashkenazim say Beis Yaakov. You ever heard of that school?
Yeah.
It's from this Rashi. That Rashi says Beit Yaakov is for the women and Bnei Israel is for the men.
But Jacob had all those sons. He was the tribe of Israel, right?
Yeah, it's a Rashi, you know. So, verse 4. Hashem says, Atem reitem. You have seen, tell the Jewish people, says Hashem to Moses, you have seen that which I did to the Egyptians, and I carried you like wings, like upon the wings of an eagle, where the eagles fly on the mountain high. Va'avi etchem, and I brought you to me. So, Rashi says something super beautiful. Why did Hashem say that He took us out of Egypt, carried us like eagles carry their offsprings? Rashi says that an eagle carries its offsprings on its wings, and other birds carry their offsprings between their legs when they fly. Because other birds are afraid that a bird which soars and flies higher will snatch their offsprings from on high. But the eagle is not afraid because he soars the highest. He's not afraid of a different bird taking its offsprings from on high. The eagle only fears man, lest men shoot an arrow unto him. Right. And the eagle says, better that the arrow hits me than my offspring. It's beautiful, right?
It is.
That's Rashi's idea. That's Rashi's idea. Now I'll tell you a beautiful thing. I have a friend who is a Yemenite Israeli, and he's a friend from rabbinical school. I actually knew him before rabbinical school. Now he's a rabbi in New York. And he told me that when his parents were going to Israel, were making Aliyah from Yemen, they saw the planes that came to take them from Israel. They never saw an airplane in their lives. They see those birds waiting for them. And they said, this is it. It's the time of the Mashiach. Hashem is coming to take us on the wings of eagles. Right? It's pretty cool. And it's the same thing with the Ethiopians, you know? Mivtza Shlomo, when Israel took on the Ethiopians in the early 90s, with the help of the Bush senior administration, you know, they took the seats, they took everything out, they just put in as many people as they could in the planes. So I took you on the wings of eagles, I carried you unto me. Very beautiful poetic imagery we have here. Verse 5. Here is the deal. V'haya im shamot yishmeu, like the second paragraph of the Shema, right? V'haya im shamot yishmeu. Should you listen to me, to Hashem, and preserve and keep my covenant? What is a covenant? It's an undying agreement, unlike a business transaction, right? It's like you say, a parent makes with a child, right? If you bring a child to this world, you have a covenant with this child. It's an undying, binding commitment and relationship.
And isn't the main aspect
Covenant.
of that is don't worship idols? Isn't that the main?
It's certainly one of the centrals. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree. Veitem li sgula mikol ha'amim ki li kol. Be unto me a sgula, a special virtue amongst all the nations, for I own this joint. I have spiritual sovereignty, dominion over planet Earth. So what the whole idea of chosenness is being brought forth here. That Israel was chosen, factually, empirically, history, to be God's agent to spreading monotheism and God's word throughout the world. I was just in New York. Of course, what do they have in the drawers? A Bible, right? Most of humanity today is monotheistic. The Bible is the most read book in the history of the world, and always will be, and has been for centuries. So Hashem says, here's your mission statement, right? Your mission statement is to be, in the words of the prophet Isaiah, a light unto the nations. You should set an example. and you're going to embody nationally, you're going to exemplify God's way. And the Torah, the Ten Commandments that I'm giving you now, through you, I'm giving it to all of humanity. You are chosen for this endeavor. So, a great French philosopher called Emmanuel Levinas, on whom I wrote my doctorate and 2 books, he defines Judaism as liberté difficile, difficult freedom. Right? It's not the chosenness of, we are upgrading you to first class. So you can spread your legs and order Dom Pérignon champagne. It's not the chosenness of privilege. It's the chosenness of what a great historian of modern Europe, Tony Judd, called in one of his books, the burden of responsibility. We have the burden of responsibility. Right? That's why when a person gets an aliyah to the Torah, he says, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, who chose us of all nations, ve'natan lanu et Torato, and gave us the Torah. It's together.
It's not luck.
What?
Not luck.
It's not luck, but it's also not you're going to be the spoiled brat that I'm just going to spoil. On the contrary, we have suffered. We were the most persecuted minority, certainly in Europe and North Africa vis-a-vis Islam, for many centuries. We actually suffered more than others. There's a devastating poem that Natan Alterman, who was the Israeli national poet, wrote during the days of the Holocaust in Israel. You know the Israeli daily paper Haaretz? It was already in publication before the state came into being. And he wrote this terrible, this really shaking, reproachful towards heaven poem called Kivanu Vacharta, you have chosen us. And he says, you have chosen us, Jewish children, good children, wise children, intelligent children. You have chosen us from all children to be massacred by the Nazis. It gives me chills all over my bodies and my head as I say it. So this is very important to understand. We have been given a sacred torch to try and proliferate spirituality and human decency and morality in the world. Goodness, compassion, right? So you see sometimes every now and then you hear an anti-Semitic person saying something really vicious. Oh, the Nazis thought they were a superior race. The Jews also say they are chosen. But we're chosen to serve God, and to be representatives of God in this world. That's what Rabbi Ovadio Sforno, the Italian commentator I mentioned earlier, he says, what does it mean? It says here in the next verse, you will be for me a kingdom of Kohanim, a kingdom of priests. In some religions you have the priest. He is the religious guy. Yeah, you go to him, he prays for you. No! You pray yourselves to God. Each and every one of you has a relationship with God. You don't have to go through the priest. Right? There's no such thing as a Jew coming to a rabbi saying, I want you to pray for me on Shabbat. Say the Amidah for me. There's no such thing. You do it for yourself. So you will be for me a kingdom of Kohanim. Each one of you is a leader. Right? It's a nation of leaders.
So with that...
And let me just conclude by saying, and Rabbi Sforno says, what does it mean to be a kingdom of Kohanim? That you are Shagrirei Hashem. You are God's ambassadors in this world. Whatever you do represents the Jewish people and thereby God as well. Right? That's why when somebody is Jewish and he does something great, we say that's a great ambassador for the Jewish people, And when somebody does something negative, we say it's Chilul Hashem. That's a disgrace.
You take it personally,
right?
like we did it.
Right. And that's also whether we like it or not, that's what some non-Jews say. They say, look at this person. He's a Jew. Right? It's bad press.
Yeah.
Or, wow, look at that Jewish person. Right? So, so here in these verses, that's really big. We got our mission statement as a people. Right?
Now, does this go all the way forward? In other
Yes.
words, it's into the future?
Right. If you will keep my covenant. Covenant is perpetual and undying. Right? That's what we're saying. So...
And one other thing that God says, you are my possession, as earth is my possession.
Mm-hmm.
So it's saying he's the creator of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no matter what, we're still bound to God because it's sort of he's saying, you're my possession.
Yeah, we are God's servants. It's something that the rabbis discuss in the rabbinic literature quite extensively, saying what's going on here. We exchanged one form of slavery, which is slavery to Egypt, to the Egyptians, and we exchanged it for being God's servants. So, the answer is that Egypt represents the material world. It's either we are completely captivated and held captive by the demands of the physical material world that we all have to deal with in our lives, or that we say, yeah, we are in this world, and it's God's will that we are in this world, but ultimately our goal is to kind of hover over the physical material world and creates those sacred times, like when we go to pray, like Shabbat, when we study Torah, when our ultimate goal is to be people of goodness, people who serve God, right? So, a lot of people say, one of my friends said that in his graduating sermon in rabbinical school, that everybody worships something. Question is, what do you worship? Some people worship their own ego. Some people worship money. Some people worship social status. Some people worship political power. Some people worship celebrity status. Some people worship the body. Some people worship physical bodily pleasures. Everybody worships, prejudices something over everything else. The question is, what is that something? In the Jewish view, that something should be serving God, meaning spreading goodness in the world, right? So it's true. It's true. And the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, we learn Pirkei Avot, ethics from the Mishnah on Tuesday nights. You have no person who is truly an emancipated, liberated person, but a person who engages in Torah. So, the Torah is telling us something very counterintuitive, very paradoxical. He says, when you are free? When you're tied up to something. When you put on tefillin, you're tied up to God, then you're free. When you are tied up to your family and friends and your community, then you are free. If you're just completely loose, hovering in the world, aimlessly just trying to cater your own wants and cravings without any ties and obligations to anyone or anything, you're not free. You're basically like a driven leaf in the world. So in many ways, the Jewish philosophy of freedom is antithetical to some secular philosophies of freedom, right? That say to be free is not to be committed to anything, right? There's a great rabbi in Israel called Rabbi Chaim Navon. A wonderful rabbi, very modern rabbi, clean-shaven, wrote many books. And he just wrote this book that he talks about this issue. He talks about this issue that if you kind of undo all the ties that a person has, people are left with nothing of meaning and purpose, and they just hover around aimlessly. And what happens is, what happens in Europe, for example, is that you don't have families anymore. Europe has a negative birth rate from Portugal to Russia. All of them. All the countries in Europe have from 0.7 to 1.8 children per household. So Europe is dying. So, it's just really interesting, the Jewish idea is to be really free, is to be invested in something greater than yourself with others. Very counterintuitive to our culture, right? To the culture of radical individualism of our time.
Again, invested
in others, right?
In something
greater than yourself with others, right? So Moses was a good boy, and he shared in verse 7 with the elders, the sages, what Hashem just told him about the mission statement of the Jewish people, and the people responded in unison, we're into that. Everything that Hashem spoke, we will do. Now, on verse 9, Hashem says to Moses, behold, I'm coming to you in the thickness of the cloud. Rashi says that's fog, which means that, the people still, one interpretation is, what does it mean in the thickness of the cloud? That it still wasn't a completely unmediated revelation, because as Hashem tells Moses later, Lo yireni adam v'chai, it's impossible for a person to completely be exposed to God's presence and still remain in existence. Because the infinite light of Hashem is overbearing and overwhelming. Just like if the sun would completely permeate our planet, we would not be able to exist. Right? Now we have to prepare. On verse 10, Hashem says to Moses, goes to the people, tell them to sanctify themselves, let them wash their garments, go to the dry cleaners. Verse 11, and be ready on the third day, because on the third day Hashem will descend in presence of the whole people upon Mount Sinai. Of course, this is allegory. God is not a person. He's not going to descend physically on the mountain. It's a spiritual allegory. And in verse 12, he tells the people, nobody can go upon the mountains. Whoever gets too close will be electrocuted from this spiritual energy. And verse 14, Moses descended from the mountains to the people. He spiritualized, sanctified the people. They all washed their garments. And then for 3 days, ready yourselves spiritually, purify yourselves, do not engage in physical intimacy. And then verse 16, on the third day, there was great thunder and lightning, and the entire people shuddered with fear and trembling. And we have a description of everything that's going on here. And there's the sound of the shofar that grows and increases constantly. There's a midrash that symbolically it was the same shofar from the ram's horn that Abram binded instead of Isaac, and it's the same horn the same shofar that will be blown in the Messianic era. So one day to understand it is that in order to go places as a nation, as an individual, the first prerequisite is sacrifice, being willing to sacrifice for the common good, for others. That's what Yitzchak did, Akedat Yitzchak, right? The second is unity. It's what we have in this parasha. And finally, in redemptive times, there will be the shofar once more. Okay, so we're going to end up momentarily. What?
Was that horn God's? It wasn't somebody at the bottom of the hill blowing the horn. That was coming from God, right? The horn.
Let's go back to it. It's a very good question. Let's go back to it for a second. Let's see.
Number 19, line 19.
The sound of the shofar.
Yeah.
It just says that somebody blew a horn. Doesn't it give us whether it was God or people or I mean, what was it?
Yeah.
What was it? Ram's horn. That was, maybe they don't
Let's
want
see.
to attribute it to a person, so that maybe they think it is God.
But he had lightning. so
Well,
he
here
could
in
lightning.
Rashi it says about it growing louder and louder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It says it is the way of an ordinary person that the longer he continues to blow, his sound gets continually weaker, but here it kept getting much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Why was this so? This was so as to attune their ears to that which they could hear or accept.
Mm-hmm.
It's an intensity. When you're blowing a horn and it gets louder, you're putting more into it.
So it was coming from God?
Well, what Rashi is saying here, like you're saying, is in order to let their ears hear what they were able to hear and not to shock them suddenly. It's kind of like it's a very silly example, but it's like if somebody goes to shower and you shower in hot water, you don't start with the most hot water. You kind of let yourself acclimate into it. So it's like gradually the revelation became more and more intense.
Okay, good.
Okay?
Yeah.
So let's do 2 more minutes and suffice ourselves for today. I'd like us to go to hold on. Let me find it. Maybe I missed it already. Let me see. Okay. Maybe it's... All right, let's go... Okay, so let's go for a second into the Ten Commandments. It says the beginning, right? Verse 2. Verse 2 of
20.
20. It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibet avadim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt from the house of slavery. I spoke about it in the minyan. What kind of a commandment is that? Usually a commandment is do something, like observe Shabbat, or don't steal. Do or don't. Right? Passive or active. Here, this is not a commandment.
It's a declaratory statement.
Right.
But here's the thing.
It's an assertion.
Isn't the word commandment really not a good translation to begin with?
Right. Aseret Adibot really means the 10 proclamations.
You're right. So that makes more sense.
Right. So I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt from a house of bondage. But then we would become enslaved to countless other nations in history. So what's the point here? The point here is that by giving us the Torah, Hashem emancipated us from inner slavery. That once you have the Torah, you can live in freedom even in adverse political circumstances. Right?
And it's divine will that this is.
Right. Have no other gods upon me. I'll conclude for today by saying 2 things. We have an earlier segment in our parasha where it says the following. It says, let me find it for you, because it's first of all, notice people always ask what's more important to be in Judaism, spirituality or morality. So we see that the 10 Commandments are exactly 5 and 5. The 5 on the right are, I'm the Lord your God, don't serve other gods, remember, observe Shabbat, don't take God's name in vain, observe Shabbat. These are the opening 4. The 5th is honor your parents. The Talmud says the parents and Hashem, the joint venture, the creation of a human being. So the first 5 on the right are ultimately about our relationship with God, right? I'm God, don't worship other gods. The other 5 are really moral mitzvot with other people. No murder, no thievery, right? No perjury in the court of law. See, it's exactly 50-50. It's very important. Ultimately, our sages say that derech eretz kodemet leTorah, that human decency takes precedence over Torah. Without a basic threshold of human decency, we can't really lead a Torah life and grow in Torah. So ultimately you can say basic human decency is the base of the pyramid. But we see with the 10 Commandments that it's kind of like 50-50. To lead a fully Jewish life, we need to try and work both on our spiritual growth and our moral well-being. I want to conclude with the following thing.
He calls himself jealous here.
Right. Again, a metaphor. 19:9.
Is that going backwards?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to show you. With this we conclude. Page 349, verse 9. Moses told God the people's response. You see where I am? Second to last line on 349.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, it's Vayaged Moshe et Divream el Hashem. So Moses conveyed the words of the people to God. Now, what were the words of the people? That's the question, right? What were the words of the people? Anybody knows? Rashi's going to tell us.
The words of the people were, we agree, we will follow.
Yeah, but there was something else.
Oh, they want to see him.
Look at, I'll tell you what the Rashi says. Rashi says, Eno domeh hashomea mipi hashaliach lashomea mipi hamelech retzonenu lirot et malkenu. The people said to Moses, we want to also experience the revelation. We want a spiritual experience. Rashi says they told him, you're going to be the emissary, Moses. You're going to go up there and you're going to hear it from God. But we want to hear it from God too. It's not the same thing when you hear something through an emissary than when you experience something yourself. Mm-hmm. Think about the kids we born bat mitzvah today. They were not alive during 9/11.
Yeah.
So for us, it's something that we lived. For them, they heard about it. It's not the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. They're telling Moses, we don't want to experience the revelation by way of an emissary. We want to experience it ourselves. Retzonenu lirot et malkenu. Our desire is to behold the King's face. We want to have a spiritual connection to Hashem. And that's a very important message for every Jew at every point in time. That ultimately, for Jewish spirituality to be a living thing in our lives, It has to be something that we experience ourselves. It can't just be
What we read.
learning it. Some places some people only learn Torah scholarly, academically. But here, basically, the point is, one of the most important things, certainly in the Kabbalah and the Hasidic tradition, is the desire to have an unmediated relationship with God is something that's very important in Jewish spirituality. Okay? Make sense? All right. So obviously the Ten Commandments is a very long text, so we touched upon some of the parsha, and feel free to obviously continue yourself, and we'll stop here and see each other, God willing, Shabbat. Thank you for coming.